Welcome back to the world of inspirational women in history. Today, we are going to learn about many wonderful, inspiring, life changing women. Three of them, in fact. And remember, this is a series, so we're learning about three women every week. Okay, so come back and stay tuned for each one. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Miss Bree. I'm an educator, a farmer, an illustrator, a singer, and a grammar nerd. Welcome to the farm school. You ready? Let's go. First up, Bessie Coleman. Now, she's an amazing lady. I mean, they're all amazing, but she's one of my favorites. I'm biased. Anyway, we're going to keep going. Sorry, I got distracted. Bessie Coleman was born in 1892 in Texas, the 10th of 13 children. Her parents were sharecroppers, and life was marked by poverty and hard labor. As a young girl, Bessie walked miles to attend a one-room segregated school. She loved learning, especially math, but opportunities were very scarce. She eventually moved to Chicago, where she worked as a manicurist in a barbershop. There, she listened to stories from World War I pilots returning from Europe. She became fascinated with flying. When she applied to American flight schools, she was rejected over and over again. What was the reason? She was black, and she was a woman. Many people would have stopped there. Bessie did not, because she's awesome. Instead, she learned French, saved her money, and traveled to France in 1920 because French aviation schools were willing to teach her. And in 1921, she earned her international pilot's license, becoming the first African American woman and the first Native American person to do so. She didn't just break a barrier, she flew through it. And when Bessie returned to the United States, she knew that being licensed wasn't enough. To truly make a living in aviation, she had to become spectacular. So she became a barnstormer, performing daring aerial stunts, loops, dives, figure eights, and wing walking. Crowds came to see her fly. They called her Queen Bess. But Bessie used her fame for far more than entertainment. She refused to perform at air shows that enforced segregated seating. If black and white audiences were not allowed to enter through the same gates, she would not fly. She once said, "The air is the only place free from prejudices." For her, flying wasn't just about thrill, it was about freedom. She dreamed of opening a flight school for black students to ensure others could follow her path. In 1926, Bessie was preparing for an air show in Jacksonville, Florida. But during a practice flight, a wrench became lodged in the aircraft's controls. The plane flipped unexpectedly, and Bessie, who was not wearing a seatbelt because she was scouting parachute jump locations, was thrown from the aircraft. She was just 34 years old, and her dream of opening a flight school was never realized. But despite all that, her impact was enormous. She inspired future generations of black aviators, including the Tuskegee Airmen. Today, every year on the anniversary of her death, African American pilots fly over her grave in Chicago and drop flowers from the sky. She has been honored with a U.S. postage stamp and featured on the American Women Quarter. Bessie Coleman proved that courage sometimes requires leaving your country, defying expectations, and risking everything for a dream. She looked at a sky full of barriers and saw possibility. Next up, we have Susan B. Anthony. Now, Susan B. Anthony was born in 1820 into a Quaker family in Massachusetts. The Quakers believed strongly in equality, including equality between men and women. From childhood, Susan was taught that injustice should be confronted, not ignored. She was a gifted student and became a teacher at just 17 years old. But she quickly noticed something unfair. Male teachers were paid significantly more than female teachers. That realization sparked something in her. At first, she became active in the temperance movement, advocating against alcohol abuse. But when she tried to speak at conventions, she was told women were not allowed to address the audience. So she shifted her focus. If women couldn't even speak publicly, how could they influence laws? And she realized that without the right to vote, women would always be politically powerless. So in 1872, Susan B. Anthony decided to attest the law. She's so fun. She's just amazing. The 14th Amendment had recently defined citizens as persons born or naturalized in the United States. Susan argued that as a citizen, she had the right to vote. So on November 5th, 1872, she walked into a polling place in Rochester, New York, and cast her ballot in the presidential election. And 2 weeks later, she was arrested. Her trial became a national spectacle, and the judge refused to allow her to testify in her own defense. He directed the jury to find her guilty without deliberation, an extraordinary move. She was fined $100, which was a lot of money back then even. She refused to pay. She declared, "Is it a crime for a citizen of the United States to vote?" Her act of civil disobedience drew national attention to women's suffrage. Susan B. Anthony spent more than 50 years traveling the country, giving speeches, organizing conventions, and petitioning Congress. She co-founded the National Women's Suffrage Association with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She endured ridicule, insults, and political opposition. Many Americans, including some women, believed women's suffrage would destroy traditional family roles. It didn't. But Susan did not waver. And in 1906, at age 86, she gave one of her final speeches. She ended with the words, "Failure is impossible." She died that same year. 14 years later, in 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, granting women the right to vote. She did not live to cast a legal ballot, but because she voted anyway, millions of women, including you and I, after her, could. Today, her face appears on U.S. currency, the first real woman to do so. Susan B. Anthony reminds us that progress often requires courage long before victory is guaranteed. She planted seeds, and others harvested the rights. And lastly, today we're looking at Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt was born in 1884 into a wealthy New York family, but her childhood was marked by loneliness and loss. Her mother, a socialite, once called her plain. Her father, whom she adored, struggled with alcoholism and died when she was young. By age 10, Eleanor was an orphan. She grew up painfully shy and insecure. But everything changed when she was sent to school in England. There, a teacher recognized her intelligence and leadership potential. For the first time, Eleanor felt confident. When she returned to the United States, she began working in settlement houses, helping immigrants and the poor. Unusual work for a woman of her social class. And in 1905, she married her distant cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. She didn't yet know that her life would soon intersect with some of the greatest crises of the 20th century. When Franklin Roosevelt, FDR, became president in 1933 during the Great Depression, Eleanor became First Lady, and she transformed what that role meant. Previous First Ladies focused largely on hosting and ceremony. Eleanor traveled constantly. She visited coal mines, factories, hospitals, and military bases. She listened to ordinary Americans and reported back to her husband. She became his eyes and ears. She held her own press conferences, but only for female journalists, forcing newspapers to hire women reporters if they wanted access to the White House, which is a great idea, an amazing decision, because it did. She opened so many new doors. She wrote a daily newspaper column called My Day, sharing her thoughts directly with the public. She supported civil rights at a time when it was politically risky. When the daughters of the the daughters of the American Revolution refused to allow black singer Marian Anderson to perform at Constitution Hall, Eleanor resigned from the organization. And then she helped arrange Anderson's historic concert at the Lincoln Memorial instead. Eleanor understood that influence could be used quietly but powerfully. After Franklin Roosevelt's death in 1945, many assumed Eleanor would retreat from public life. Instead, she stepped onto the global stage. President Harry Truman appointed her as a delegate to the newly formed United Nations. There, she chaired the committee that drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948. The document declared that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Eleanor worked tirelessly to build consensus among nations deeply divided after World War II. She navigated political tensions, cultural differences, and Cold War rivalries. For her efforts, she became known as the First Lady of the World. She once said, "It's better to light a candle than curse the darkness." When she died in 1962, she left behind a transformed understanding of what public service could look like, especially for women. She showed that leadership is not always loud. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it writes. Sometimes it builds bridges between nations. And Eleanor Roosevelt did all three. So, as we've covered each and every episode, look at these women, right? 3 totally different women. Completely different, right? Absolutely nothing connecting them except the thread that is history, right? The thread that is each one faced a moment, right? When the world said, no, you can't do that. That's not something you can do. And each one of them said, watch me. I'm going to do it anyway. And they did, right? They didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for perfect conditions. And they didn't wait for applause. They just acted. And that's the key, right? So think about what you would do, right? If you had the opportunity to change history, because you might. You have to remember, history's not written yet, right? We're still living it. Every single day, you're living history. So you have an opportunity every single day to become part of that change. All right? So what will you do? I want you to think about that. Thank you for coming, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this one. We've got another one coming up next week, and I will see you in the next recording. Thanks. Bye.